Well, welcome back to Business AM. Let's continue, therefore, with the issues that we have for you this morning. Now, top banks are now protesting a move from the Central Bank of Kenya to freeze their plans for new loan rates after the scrapping of the cap on interest rates that have seen the lenders go through periods of reduced profitability. The regulator had asked the banks to propose new lending formulas that were going to make the basis of setting interest rates. Now, CEOs who spoke to Business Daily on the basis of anonymity have put the CBK on the spot for taking a customer approach as opposed to an industry protection approach model. Even after the removal of the cap on interest rates, the banks have resigned to lending at no more than 4% of the central bank benchmark rate. Now, the removal of the cap on interest rates, which was earlier celebrated by industry players, has failed to play in their favor, as the CBK has seemingly moved to ensure the availability of cheap credit in the economy, a factor which most of the bank bosses now see as their inability to price their risk under the prevailing lending environment. Question is, therefore, is the CBK over-regulating the banking industry in Kenya? I want to get your statements on that, Gabriel, this morning. Are they over-regulating?
So there are two sides of every coin. And I think when looking at the banking industry, the first thing I do is segment the industry, because we have the very large banks and we have the smaller banks, and those two cannot be treated the same. And I believe it's very wrong for the regulator to treat them the same. For example, all these banks are very liquid at the moment. And the reason and where CBK is coming from, people need to understand that it's coming from the situation we had with Imperial Bank. So CBK since then has taken a very active role in making policy, in regulating, in monitoring the banks. So that's where CBK is coming from, trying to protect the depositors. And based on that, of course, as a depositor, I'm happy. But then as a borrower, I'll be disserviced, because if I'm considered risky by the bank, then I cannot get a facility. And, the ropes I have to jump are so high, I end up just going to another institution. Now for the bank's ability to earn, of course, the regulation is doing them a disservice. Because one, they are forced to put quite a bit of their money in government paper, which we've seen in recent days the interest has been declining. So we expect the earnings from the government paper to decline. Yet they cannot even add 2% or 3% on the current rates and then lend to the SMEs who actually need this money more, some of whom who are actually able to service these loans, but for one reason or the other, they may not qualify. They don't have sufficient security, etc., or they can't cover 100% security cover on the amount. Yet these are profitable entities that can actually support their loans. So the CBK, in its attempt to control the industry and protect depositors as well as help smaller banks, may actually end up strangling a bit the effort by the government to channel more capital to SMEs. But these are private institutions. You can't direct them, tell them you have to put this money in these SMEs. If they can't price in the risk, then they'll simply do what they're doing. And we'll see that for the foreseeable future until the strategy changes either way.
Pretty much, Kusera. So, Yes, Gabriel, let me bring in Kusera also on that issue as well. I mean, Kusera, yes, we did celebrate the removal of the cap on interest rate, and we did see exactly also how the economy reacted. They said now the lenders will be willing to give us that money. But if you look at the gross loans also that we have been getting in the economy, they have been on an increasing level. So let's talk about that despite them not lending heavily, despite them having a problem with them not being able to price them properly, they have been lending. So do you think the bosses have a point on this, on being left out, that the CBK has taken an industry approach?
Okay, I think the central bank outlines basic policies and procedures that the bank should put in place in order to be able to become profitable. And it primarily sets out to reinforce existing best practices among banks by stressing out following points, which include compliance with laws and obviously adherence to standards. From where I see it, the central bank provides prudential guidelines to banks to develop the appropriate policies and procedures and to help them see whether they can become afloat. But to your earlier question, which I would really want to answer and maybe come back to this other question later, is that is there over-regulation of banks? To some extent, yes and no. And I think there's been a lot of flexibility right now from the central bank to the commercial banks, whether it's pricing their risk and so on and so forth, which I think, in my view, is helping banks start rethinking of alternative ways to be able to reach out to their clients and to be able to remain profitable. Because, I mean, from where we are sitting, the current environment is extremely risky, not just only for businesses, but also for banks, and at the same time, as my friend and colleague has insisted, on borrowers. So I think moving forward, obviously, there must be some flexibility in both the way the banks operate and the way the central bank is able to regulate and supervise these financial institutions.
Pretty much. Now, Dr. Mushalule, I'm going to bring you in as well. Yes, they have saying that, and if you look at the results that they have, your results, especially that we've seen from the banking industry, I mean, most of them are recording reduced profitability. And if you look at the way the CBK has been approaching them, you are the guys to bear the brunt for the economy, take care of the economy in our place. So do you expect that post COVID-19 or next year that they'll be asking for more?
Oh, okay. I think you can hear me well. Pertaining that, we can put in mind that also previously, maybe I can go back again from the first question in terms of the CBK regulation before I respond to what you've asked me. If you go to the history background, commercial banks in Kenya have been enjoying the free market where they are the ones to determine the loans and also interest rates. So in terms of over-regulated by the CBK, I also say no or also say yes, depending on the behavior of also their customers and also the management and also everything all around. It's an involvement of everybody there in that industry. So whereby I can say, given the history of Kenya banks with the lending rates, the CBK is not over-regulating the banking sector. But also, this is the results whereby it's going to give the banking sector to open up their minds and to diversify on their incomes generating formulas, apart from just dealing with issues of lending and such kind of stuff. So they can diversify some of their activities so that also they can improve their economy in one or another, putting in mind that also this regulation also, we have the tiers of bank, first tier, second tier, and the rest. So the regulation, so some tasks can be more favored than others. So the way Gabriel has said, depending on the level of banks also it has some impact, either positive, negative. Okay. So in terms of the reserve ratio, I think you've asked about the reserve ratio.
Yes, which was actually my next point, Dr. Mushalule. Do you think that just sort of relaxing the reserve ratio to 4.25% is sort of seen by the CBK as a way to cushion the banks now?
Okay, in terms of the reserve ratio, I think it might not protect the industry, given that many job losses have made people very risky to lend to. There are so many job losses, so everybody's fearing to lend. So it becomes a challenge. Therefore, it will also increase the cash banks hold, but banks are not likely to extend the credit to consumers because of those challenges that are there. So everybody's taking risk. Everybody wants to be on a safer side. You cannot play around with any coin that you have right now. So I think for me, the reserve ratio might not protect the industry.
Pretty much. All right, Doctor. Yes.
That's my opinion.
Fantastic. Dr. Kusaba, Edward Kusaba, I want to bring you in as well on this one as well. I mean, the only thing that we've seen happen from CBK is that when we did start COVID-19, they said, well, we've given the banks a 4.25 cash reserve ratio so that it can have more funds to lend. Is that enough for the banks? Or they would have said, well, but you've got to ask for this percentage out of this money that we're freeing for you?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. From where I sit, I mean, when you say you want to increase the reserve ratio for banks so that the banks could be able to extend credit to clients, I think the question begs whether clients want that money at this point in time, and whether businesses, their turnovers are such that they may be able to borrow and be able to repay. That has been the question. I think what we are seeing is that obviously their income interest has gone down because most of the clients right now are risk averse. They don't want to be able to take money from banks. Basically because you're taking money from financial institutions, and where are you couping that money, and are you able to recoup back that money that you've taken? So I think it's a watch and wait approach. I mean, everybody's just cautious on the way moving forward. No one really. I mean, it's not very clear cut on whether increasing cash reserve ratios in banks will help these banks be able to extend credit to clients, and whether those banks will still remain profitable. So it's a catch-22 situation.
Pretty much, Gabriel.
If I may, just and I'll differ slightly with Kusema,
yes,
Edward, because there is demand for the bank loans. We have businesses, and they need the capital now more than ever, because for example, if as a business you are holding 2 months or 1 month's cash flow, you have 1 month's reserves, and then you've depleted that. So it means if you are able to support a certain level of debt, then you need to take it up so that you can push through before your turnover comes back, because otherwise you'll have to collapse your entire operating system, your staff, etc., and then you have to rebuild back, which even further delays the recovery that everybody needs much. But that said, on the reserve ratio, I mean, if you think about it, what does that percentage point do for big banks like Equity Bank, KCB, etc.? These are banks that are already very liquid. And when I say they're very liquid, I'm looking at their investment in government bonds and treasuries. These are papers they can liquidate and channel that money to borrowers. But smaller banks actually benefited quite a lot from that reserve ratio because it boosted them in terms of their liquidity, because some of their customers, for example, think about the bank that has a MOU with KQ. We discussed KQ earlier. Now think about the bank that was lending directly to KQ employees, and then you come and tell them 1,500 of these employees that we have an MOU for me to lend to them. You are actually planning to dismiss all of that. It means 1,500, I already have 1,500 bad loans because you're going to dismiss these people and there's nothing I can do. So smaller banks are going to benefit big time from the reserve ratio, but it goes back to there is demand for these loans. Customers do want it. Funny enough, the banks are spending a lot on their sales team to market these loans, but the problem is the pricing. They cannot price in the risk. So you'll have salespeople from banks come into your business every day. You'll tell them this is how much you need, and you actually need the cash. But then you can't meet on the terms and conditions of these facilities. So that I believe is what we need to focus on and decide what actually meets the market as is, the terms and conditions of these loans.
Pretty much, gentlemen, let's jump on to the next issue this morning. Now, the High Court has rejected a bid to compel the government to prepare and submit to the National Assembly a bill to cap private school fee. Now, the petition by Crawford International School parents that sought to compel the Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha and Attorney General Kihara Kariuki to develop a framework for private schools and institutions offering international curriculum in Kenya was dismissed by Justice Weldon Korir, who ruled that the fact that the private schools do not receive taxpayer money allows them to price their services based on forces of demand and supply. Now, price controls have been virtually inactive in Kenya since 1990 following the advent of liberalization. But in 2011, Kenya enacted a law that gave the government the leeway to impose price controls on palm prices. Now, Dr. Mshelule, is the petition by the parents justified based on those two laws?
Some were right, some were not.
Yes.
Because let's say that when you say the High Court rejecting a bid to compel the government to prepare the National Assembly on to cap the private school fees. You know, the private school, the way they're being run, is very different from the public sector. There are so many resources there. There are so many things there. There are so many procedures. There's so many. It involves. I mean, I'm a product of a private school. I schooled in Buka Academy in Mumias. I'm a product of private school. But if you compare our private school with the other public school, how things have been. It's so much different. So for me, it doesn't make some sense. So I mean, I think the parents here, they come in because they are the key people there, because they're the one who pay fees, they're the one who know things are happening. Because you cannot even yourself at your level, despite the fact that things were happening, the COVID, even you not be much confident to take your kid in a public school, putting in mind even some of them, more than 100 kids in one class. So I think that one, it doesn't, for me personally, I think this bill, I think the private schools, the capping up their fees comes with many demands. It doesn't just, somebody else don't wake up in the morning and say we're going to have these fees. Fees comes with many demands. That's what I can say. So whatever is happening here is somebody somewhere is trying to play politics, whereby it cannot end up where. It needs to be an academic.
Yes, very much.
Don't play politics with academics.
All right, Gabriel. From an investment perspective, should the government? Is this justified? Because now the parents are going to appeal as well.
Well, first, I have to say I'm biased. I'm not a parent. So. But absolutely not. I think this is something the government should just forget immediately. If you look at the private education system, the investment that has been put by some of these institutions and the likes of Crawford and the very high-end schools, it's massive. I mean, if you look at the areas they operate in, we are talking about, if you need about 3 acres to 5 acres, an acre is going for 100 million. So do the parents ask where this capital is coming from so that the schools are next to their properties? Look at it this way. Some of these schools, the problem with the private education system is that they have enjoyed a lot of stability. If you look at the past 10 years, there's been no disruption to their revenue income. Even during 2007, 2008 post-election, the school calendar went on somehow. So in these 10 years, our revenues have been assured. We could easily predict when they will come in. So the schools are not keeping any reserves. It goes back to that. There was no reason to keep money in the school because the fees is going to come in the next term. But again, if you look at the same schools, out of a 10-year period, 4 of those years are actually spent doing some level of expansion. So during those 4 years, the school is actually tight on cash. But in the 6, they're rich. Now, the problem is that private schools, and that is their right, they've been taking out cash, they take profits. But then in these 4 years that you're actually undergoing an expansion, that's when you need your money more. And you can't cap the fees because we need this money to set up these facilities that the parents then come and enjoy. So if you cap the fees, are you willing to cap the classification of services that you're getting? Yeah, because there's a reason you go to Crawford, there's a reason you go to certain schools and not others. So it is what it is, and I think the government should just steer clear of this one. Yeah,
I like what you say. It is what it is, Edward. It is what it is, or the government is gonna have some bit of control, especially putting the COVID-19 into perspective, because this is coming out of the COVID-19 crisis in the country.
If I can just say something on that, look at it this way. The education system, or rather even the private schools, this is the only segment that is actually, together with the airlines, that is still suffering. Because schools have not opened. As well as travel, we still have restrictions. Manufacturing is back. Local transport is back. Most of the other industries are actually back. We're back in office. But funny enough, schools are yet to open. So this is one of the industries that is still suffering because their kids are not back and they don't know when they can come back. They don't know under what kind of rules they'll be coming back. So how can you want to penalize the one industry that is actually the most uncertain at the moment? They're the ones that are the most uncertain at the moment.
Yes.
So if you penalize them, then what are you saying? How do they come back? Yeah.
Edward, do you have some sentiments on that? Are you siding with Gabriel on that issue this morning?
No, I mean, for me, I have a different view.
Bring it on, bring it on, man.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this is unprecedented times, and therefore, income levels are low generally. Disposable incomes are low generally, and for you to be able to keep that high level of expectation that parents are going to give you the amount of money that you need is being unrealistic, and so. if you put it in the context of COVID, then I think government intervention sometimes could protect parents, because I mean parents are part of the citizenry of Kenya, and therefore if you look at situations where income levels have been low, business activity has been low, then you don't expect private schools to increase their fees at a time like this. And the issue of price control is something that we must start revisiting. I mean, we must be able to look at what the Asian tigers are doing, particularly countries like India, where price controls are still very effective. I think in a country like ours, where we do not have legislation that helps consumers, then I think something else has to be taken into perspective. If you look, for instance, the land issue and why land is so expensive in our country, then it's not just about demand and supply. There must be some other interventions that are basically coming from, I think, law, regulation or something. Otherwise, if you leave the law of demand and supply to really operate in African countries, then there are people who take advantage of how things have been operating. So from my perspective, there must be some form of intervention, or there must be some form of cautioning these schools to be able to anticipate the times that we are living in.
Pretty much,
because
gentlemen.
then it begs the question.
Yes.
Then it begs the question of, if, for example, there's low business activity, retrenchments like the ones you're talking about, and if I was taking my child to a school like Crawford, then what happens? What happens? Because generally the whole economic situation has gone down. So there must be some interventions. Either the government supports the schools, or the schools start revising what they have put forward.
Pretty much. All right, now let's jump. Let's just because of time. Yes, Dr. Mshelule, I'm gonna pick your sentiments on the next issue because we're sort of running out of time this morning. Now, Kenya's private sector recorded a second straight month of growth during the month of August, with output and new orders rising solidly and loosened travel restrictions. Now, this according to the latest Stanbic Bank Kenya Purchasing Managers Index survey. Now, the headline PMI index posted 53.0 in August, signaling a second consecutive month of improving business conditions in the Kenya private sector economy. According to the survey, Kenyan firms reported a sharp upturn in new orders during August as the easing of the COVID-19 related restrictions led to rising customer demand that enabled businesses to expand and recover some output lost during the partial lockdown that was imposed in early April. Among the restrictions that were implemented include a ban on international flights into Kenya, as well as the cessation of movement into and out of Nairobi, Mombasa, Kilifi, and Mandera counties. Now, commenting on the survey's findings, Jibran Qureshi, head of Africa Research at Stanbic Bank Kenya, said a second consecutive month of growth continues to indicate that the private sector is moderately emerging from the trough in April, adding that easier curfew restrictions and ameliorating external demand continue to support purchasing activity. Let's leave it there. And the question for you, Dr. Mshelule, is that, well, are things in the private sector back to normal?
Not really. Things are not back to normal. Even you've just been discussing on the issue of the banks. You've been discussing about the issue of the Kenya and the KQ stuff. Okay, and also we've been discussing about even the private school. Things are not normal because even the private schools teachers, they don't have salaries. There's no proper. They don't know where they're heading. That's why it's so pathetic right now. If you go even move around, for example, here in Mumias where I am, you might find some people, even some of the key big private school teachers right now, they are doing Kazi za Vijana to get 400 shillings in a day. It's not good with all this knowledge that they're having. So you cannot say that things are they're normal. They're not normal. Okay, you can say things have tried to improve on the month of August. There's a positive note, whereby the business expectation have improved for the first time in 6 months, the way I can say. And also some of the sectors, some of the firms, they have laid some plans to diversify some of the products and open up more branches. This is some good initiative that you're looking at. But you can not say that things have come back to normal. We're working out on normality of the situation.
Yes.
You have not reached there. And maybe by next year, maybe by March or April, maybe you can say that if we change our ways, we change our attitudes, we open up more ideas that can add value, okay, in the market share, then maybe things can change.
Pretty
But
much.
the way things they are,
Yes.
is a challenge. You cannot say that things are normal. They're not normal. How can it be normal whereby other sectors, they're being closed? They're not doing business, other sectors. Other sectors, they're being regulated, the types of business they're doing, the private sectors. So it becomes very difficult.
All
and
right.
As being that corruption is still there. There's a problem.
All right, Kusawa, I hear you laughing in the background due to Dr. Mshelule's sentiments there. Do you agree that things are slowly coming back to normal?
Well, it's a yes and no answer,
Yes.
basically because, our economy is very much tied to global value chains that exist outside there. And that includes, and so there's always a backward traction. Whatever is happening globally definitely will affect what is happening locally. And so if activities and trading activities at the global ecosystem are not as robust and as vibrant as they should be, then we also anticipate that in our local situation, then obviously trade and development is slow. So what am I saying? Look at the sectors that we depend on. We depend on tourism. We depend on agriculture as those sectors that bring revenue to our country. And so if at an international level tourism is affected, definitely that has a ripple effect at our local situation. So that means the private sector, and obviously even if you look at sectors like manufacturing that actually give these sectors inputs and products, then there's a slowdown. So because of a slowdown in global value chain systems, which normally affect our local supply chain system, then we can say that business activity is extremely low in our country, and therefore private sector development has kind of stalled and is diminishing. And that will again be boosted by the fact that there will be an increase in activity at a global level. So I can definitely say that right now the private sector is not as vibrant as it should be. But we anticipate, and basically what most analysts are saying is that they are optimistic that things will start moving out, and things will start rolling back over as they should be once global value chain systems and travel comes into play. But obviously, if you look at the health sector, obviously there's a lot of supplies, not just for COVID-related medicine, but for other related antibiotics that people are taking, and so there's a boost at that sector. Thank you very much.
All right, Gabriel, just cap this conversation for us this morning, and I'm going to ask you to try and keep it within 2 minutes. Now, if you look at the way that the PMI is saying, well, it's saying that the private sector is showing some sentiment of recovery, and they're saying that things are actually moving in the right direction. But I want to ask you this question, Gabriel, this morning. Well, should we have we spoken about the cushioning of the private sector? Have you seen that? And so what does the government need to do to make sure that this talk about things going on in the right direction sort of is sustained towards the end of this year?
Okay, so just quickly to first say to translate things are back to normal. Of course, we're not yet there. Using the word normal is incorrect. Because if you look at, I'll just pick 4 things for you, and these things are readily available if you look at like the leading economic indicators. If you look at milk processing, it's down by 20 million liters. If you look at cement consumption, it's down by about 80,000 tons. If you look at building approvals, they're down by close to 30 billion in value. If you look at the airport, the travels, the arrivals and departures, they're still low. And then, of course, intuitively, if you think about 2NK Sacco and all the other circles that traverse the counties, they're not doing as much business, and that's a very big segment. The transport, the local transport, the matatus, etc., they can't move. So what government can do is, first of all, of course, lift the curfew. This will allow people time to actually hustle. There's more happening. You can do more with more time when you're not locked down in your house, because some activity may require you to stay out late, construction, etc. So I think that's the first thing the government should do. Second is we do not have a labor problem. We have quite a bit of skilled labor, as you've seen, and we have quite a number of people who are available now because of the level of unemployment that we are seeing. So what the government needs to do is now just channel a bit of capital, because technology is self-moving. We already see the level of technology adoption across the sector. So what we need is capital to be channeled during this time to the sectors that need it most. Whether it's done through the banking system, whether it's through direct government intervention, capital is what we need to be channeled to the right segments.
Pretty much. This morning, gentlemen, thank you very much for making our economic review quite a success that it has been. We were joined by Dr. Michelle, we're joined by Edward Kusawa, and also Gabriel Mwenda, who is an investment associate Horizon Africa Capital. This is your Business I Am. Take the gentleman back to the time that he came onto the studio across all our social media platforms at Metropole TVKE, and you can actually get those questions coming in at 2146. Good morning. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiag.